Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The Voice of International Students, Live Student Demand and Strategic Data and Insights for British Columbia. My name is Nelly Tink, and I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Stakeholder Engagement at the BC Council for International Education. Thank you very much for joining us today on what I hope will be an informative session on IDP's latest student research. Now, before we get started, it's important that I acknowledge that at BCCIE, we live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Now, on to a few housekeeping items. I know we are all familiar with Zoom, but as a reminder, please use the Q&A function to send your questions or if you have any comments. And if you need any technical assistance during the webinar, please use the chat box and either myself or my colleague Morgan, who's also on this call, will help answer your inquiry. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's session. We have Livia Castellanos, Vice President, External Affairs, IDP Canada, Robin Garcha, Partnerships Director, Solutions Lead, IDP Canada, and Megan Crome, Senior Marketing Manager of IDP Canada. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nelly, for inviting us, and thank you so much to all our partners and friends from BCCIE and the sector in British Columbia. We are very delighted to be here again. The last time that we were here was in November when we presented to you the Emerging Futures 8. And today we bring to you the Emerging Futures 9 alongside my colleagues, Robin and Megan. We're going to be right now engaging on our survey, and I'm going to start talking to you about it. We're going to go from more the general to the particular. So the first, we're going to be talking about the global policy overview. And as you know, so many things change in the policy environment, not only in Canada, but in the rest of the world, that I think is important, to take a peek and see how things are going in that regard. On the emerging future side, we're going to be talking about what students are perceiving at this round of emerging futures. What are their desires? What are their perceptions? What are their preferences? And also we're going to do our now second round of Canadian deep dive and provincial deep dive. So what are the students wanting when they are choosing Canada? What are their preferences? What are they saying about different provinces? So it will be an interesting session. We're going to be tagging along with a lot of data. Bear with us. If you have a questions, put it on the chat. We only have 45 minutes. And also you can put your questions and we will always send an answer through BCCIE. Moving on to the next slide. For the global policy update, I just wanted to touch very quickly on this side. Changes have occurred in the UK, changes have occurred in Australia, and it really positions Canada in a better place, specifically with the master and doctoral students, where we improve those policies. UK right now, they have reduced their post-graduation work permit to less time than Canada now, and as well they have elongated the stay for the students. So now their permanent residency after the postgraduate work permit that they have will be from 5 to 10 years. I think that makes Canada more competitive, and you can see it in the perceptions later on in the presentation. How students are actually seeing Canada as a more competitive destination than the UK. For Australia, the visa fee has increased, remains the same, is $2,000, 2,000 Australian dollars in comparison to Canada, as well as the living allowance is higher than Canada as well. The US is not even a point of discussion. We know that their policies are incredibly volatile. What is happening there, a lot of changes, a lot of volatility, and now the OPT that it is the postgraduate work permit for them, it has been reconsidered. There are discussions in the sectors in the US about actually removing it altogether. And you will see in the presentation that my colleagues are going to share with you how really the US is struggling to reposition themselves as a destination of choice by the students. Moving on to the next slide. We always talk about this slide. I think it's a very popular one of IDP. While we manage a lot of our partners all over destinations, and also we engage in conversations not only with the Canadian government and the provincial governments, but across the UK government, the Australian government, and the US government, we have learned that, our positioning now with our policies is raising. We were at the bottom, our negative press and public sentiment in the last time that I came and talked to you, and now it seems that we are pushing forward because of the policy stability. You can see now that the US is at the bottom and continues to be, so this is a good opportunity for Canada in the policy spectrum and the policy cycle. Other things that we're observing in the policy is that the perception of the student is very guided by the policy environment. So it's very important to be clear, and it's very important to communicate effective to students and parents about whatever changes is that we're seeing in the policy spectrum. So with that, I am going to pass it to my colleague Megan, who's going to be talking about the student perceptions. Go ahead, Megan.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Livia, and thanks BCCIE for having us here today. In this next section, I will be covering insights from Emerging Futures 9 survey that was released globally just in May of this year. So to provide a bit of background, Emerging Futures is IDP's flagship biannual survey that captures the evolving voice of international students globally. So since 2022, when we first released this survey, it has tracked key drivers of destination choice, perceptions, and policy impacts, offering governments, associations, and institutions actionable insights to shape student-first strategies. So let's actually dive in now. So just in terms of the research context, this survey reached nearly 6,000 students from across the globe. And from different points in the recruitment journey. So prospective students who are not yet at the application stage, those who have decided not to proceed, who we call in this survey, and you'll see this later on, decliners, those who have applied, and those who are current students, and those who have completed their studies. It was just a quick 15-minute survey. So let's take a look at the student profile. So on the left-hand side, you can see we've broken down the respondent profile by study status. And on the right-hand side, you will see the study level. And from there, we can see how many countries in the middle here the respondents came from. So it covered 118 countries and regions from across the globe. So now we'll take a look at the key findings, and then we'll jump into some of the data in the following slides. So Emerging Futures 9 shows visa certainty has shifted from something that students think about later on after they've decided to where they study to now an early stage filter. We are hearing this from our IDP counselors on the ground as well. So they're seeing changing behavior based on visa-related reasons. Students up front, as they're considering the US, UK, and Canada, are now asking, is this destination realistic for me? Will I get approved? Will I be able to stay and work afterwards? Can I afford the fees and savings requirements? And because of the policy and changes that we saw in the last slides that Lydia spoke to, students are uncertain. That shift is perhaps why we're seeing more destination switching, longer lead times for applying, and more interest in alternatives, including merging destinations and TNE options. Students are also telling us that value for money isn't always just about the cost of the education, it's the outcomes as well. Is this destination going to give me career relevant skills? Is studying here going to get me a job down the road? But we are also seeing that traditional destinations and TNE options each have their own unique draw, which we will explore later. Okay, so this is one of the most popular parts of our research. We're going to look at where these perceptions sit today. So the key headline here is, as you can see, that Australia is now the strongest overall performer across these destination perceptions. And again, this is the perceptions that the students have. So on quality of education, the US still leads with the UK just behind it. So both countries continue to dominate in academic prestige and institutional reputation globally. Australia sits very close behind in third, which is still a very strong position. So where Australia really differentiates is the more practical decision drivers. It ranks first for value for money, graduate employment opportunities, post-study workers, work visas, and international student policies. That's important because these are increasingly the factors shaping student choice, not just reputation, but outcomes and long-term opportunity. For Canada, the picture is looking quite positive. It ranks second for graduate employment opportunities and joint second for post-study work visa perceptions. So it continues to be seen as a strong destination for employability and pathways after study. So we're going to look at the next slide here. And this is the perceptions of the study destination. So finally, we'll look at the perceptions of how safe and welcoming destinations feel. This is still a relatively new measure, so we're mainly comparing it to the last survey that we did just about 6 months ago. So Australia continues to lead despite a very slight dip from the previous wave. New Zealand, Canada, and Ireland are all broadly unchanged, reinforcing fairly stable perceptions in the space. The UK has softened slightly over the last wave, but the US remains a clear outlier at the bottom, with perceptions also declining this wave, suggesting ongoing challenges around how safe and welcoming students perceive the environment to be. So now let's take a look at destination choices. So the majority of students are comparing multiple destinations. So this is possibly no surprise that students are considering more than one country to study in. In this survey, 78% of all prospective applied or current students are saying that they are evaluating or did evaluate more than one country as a potential study destination. This is a trend that we have seen increasing over the last survey. As you can see here, for instance, in Emerging Futures 6, this was only 66%. So it's raised about 12% since that survey. So there are market nuances though. And if we look at who is considering the most countries, we can see on the left-hand side that Ghana, Nigeria, and Indonesia have really high rates of considering more than one country. Conversely, you'll see on the right-hand side that students from India, Vietnam, and the Philippines are most likely to be concentrating on only one country. So if we look at what those destinations are students have in their consideration set, we can see that most students have Australia in their consideration set, followed by the UK, Canada, USA, what we would call traditional destinations. Those destinations have seen a bit of movement year on year, which you can see now, but the set is widening, and other destinations, which you can see here, outside of the traditional, have seen a lot of movement year on year. So now we'll look at what some of those other destinations are that we refer to in that slide. So these include countries in Europe, Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. You might be surprised or not surprised to see these particular countries, but students have quite a spread of study destinations they are considering. But the good news is that those traditional destinations are still leading as first choice destinations. After all that consideration, up to 5 countries, students are still choosing Canada, Australia, the UK, and the USA, as well as Ireland. Though again, sub-movement within the last year, which you can see there. Okay, so now we're going to go on to visas. So let's take a closer look at how students are experiencing visa-related barriers and policy settings across destinations. So the question that we asked here was, how much are visas actually influencing destination choice? What we can see is that visa-related factors remain very strong drivers of decision-making for prospective students. Post-study work opportunities are the strongest factor overall, with 48% saying they have a strong influence on destination choice. But financial aspects of study visas are also playing a major role. Around 43% say savings requirements strongly influence their decision, while 42% say the same about visa fees and associated costs. So students are not just thinking about future work opportunities, they're also assessing whether they can realistically afford to meet visa requirements in the first place. And that's something we also heard clearly in the qualitative research we conducted alongside Emerging Futures, reflecting what IDP counselors are actively hearing from students on the ground. One of the strongest themes to come through was that rather than being a later stage step, visa requirements are increasingly being used as an early filtering mechanism to determine whether a destination feels achievable at all. So looking now at why some students stepped away from international study, affordability still clearly dominates the conversation. So half of those students that we call decliners, who are no longer studying abroad or no longer would like to study abroad, say tuition costs are now beyond their financial reach, while more than a third point to rising living costs, although both of these measures have eased slightly since the last survey. What really stands out in this wave, though, is the sharp increase in students saying it's become too difficult to obtain a student visa. That figure has jumped 6 percentage points since August 2025, making it the biggest mover across all reasons. So while cost pressures remain very significant, we're increasingly seeing visa complexity and accessibility becoming a major barrier in its own right. Visa costs themselves remain consistently high as well, with just over a quarter of students continuing to cite them as a reason for not pursuing study abroad. Overall, this suggests that students are weighing not only whether they can afford to study internationally, but also whether they feel they can realistically navigate the process successfully. So now we're going to look at the next section, which is value for money. So another major consideration for students is the perceived value for money of their education. So we ask students which factors matter most in deciding if it is worth the money for you to pay. And we can see that career outcomes post-study rank the highest, followed by high-quality teaching and academic support and industry-specific skills and knowledge in third. And this always makes me think, these results, that it's so key for your marketing teams to, tell the stories about recent grads and what they're doing and the great jobs they've landed, as well as emphasizing your high quality faculty. So now with that section, I'm going to pass it over to Robin, who's going to look at our T&E section of the survey.
Thanks, Megan. As student mobility fluctuates around the world, more institutions are exploring transnational education options. So this next section explores students' attitudes, perceptions towards T&E. So for these next few questions in this section, we wanted to ensure that students understand what we mean when we say T&E. So this section began with an explainer stating that many institutions have their home campus in one country, but also deliver their courses and programs in another country, either through their own branch campus or through an official partnership with another institution. And this makes it possible to study a program in one country while the accrediting institution is based in another country. So then after the explanation, we gave students a list of various T&E options and asked, which are you considering or would you consider studying? Now, more than half of the prospective students say that they are open to exchange programs at 58%, as well as branch campuses at 52%, followed closely by articulation and twinning programs sitting at 51%. Now, students prefer models that retain an international in-person experience, though there is modest growth and an openness to hybrid pathways such as articulation programs. It's also worth mentioning the least appealing option was distance or virtual education, with nearly half, so 47%, saying that they are not or would not consider it. Next slide, please. We also wanted to understand student awareness of T&E options offered by institutions in the 4 major destinations. So we asked, how aware are you of the T&E qualifications offered by the institutions in the following destinations through overseas campuses, partner institutions, or online programs? And we can see that the awareness of the T&E offerings remains relatively low across all major destinations, with about 1/3 or fewer respondents globally aware. The UK and the US lead, but only marginally, indicating that T&E is still not as well established or clearly understood pathway amongst prospective students. I would say the main takeaway with this slide here is that there are opportunities to raise awareness of any T&E options, really for all of these countries listed on the slide, but especially for Canada, to build understanding of their T&E models, the benefits, and the pathways. Next slide, please. So an interesting picture emerges when we look at this beyond by source country. And so what we can see here is that 66% of prospective Chinese students said that they'd prefer to study at a branch campus in China. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Ghana and India, where only 11% and 13% of students respectively would prefer to remain in their home country at a branch campus. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are now shifting gears and looking at the power of peer-to-peer. And so the next few slides, we'll take a look at what students are saying. So this next question here was that we asked is what happens when students talk with other real students? The results report that peer-to-peer conversations are highly impactful, especially in deriving preparedness, confidence, and advocacy. In fact, 55% of respondents said that they felt more prepared for next steps, meaning helping with applications, visas, accommodation. The same percentage said that they felt more confident about their choice of institution or program when they spoke to other real students. So despite how fast technologies are changing, I don't think we've reached a time where students fully trust AI responses over what their friends, family, and other peers with the same lived experience tell them. We also see that prospective students feel a stronger sense of belonging and fit with institutions, and in fact see shorter application and conversion cycles after engaging in peer-to-peer conversations. Next slide, please. So when we look at why students are joining online communities, what stands out is that they're primarily driven by academic alignment. So nearly 2/3, 64%, said their main motivation is to connect with other students in the same course. After that, we see about 43% wanting to connect with students from the same country, which highlights how important familiarity and shared backgrounds are, especially for international students. Now, around 41% join online communities simply to make friends. 40% want to see others in their same year or cohort. So there's that strong desire, again, to build early peer networks. And finally, 37% said that they're using communities to get a sense of whether they'll fit in. So it's clear, so that it's also playing a role in reducing uncertainty and building that confidence before arrival. Okay, so AI. This next section will look at how students are using AI in their decision-making journey. Next slide. So despite the disruption that we're seeing AI causing in traditional student search behavior, it's actually quite encouraging to see these results. That students are still considering institutional website, educational counselors, and ranking central to their decision-making journeys. Currently, a quarter of respondents report to using generative AI tools such as ChatGPT or Copilot to research institutions and inform their study programs, their decisions. Over time, we may want to be prepared to see this percentage grow as technology improves and audiences become more savvy towards using them and trusting them. Next slide. Now, the data here shows us that while students are using multiple sources to gather information, they're not using all sources equally. Instead, they match sources to specific needs. So for complex, high-risk choices, students are turning to education counselors and comparison websites. This highlights that clear preference for structured, expert-led guidance when the decision carries significant consequences. AI tools are used to gather information related to academic and employability, indicating trust and fast, personalized insights for exploratory research. Now, social media and peer channels play a key role in providing that real-life perspective, helping students understand what studying abroad actually feels like. And they're using official institutional sources, such as university or college websites, for those compliance-heavy topics, such as getting visa information and program costs. Now, the responses reveal that students are intent-driven in how they are using each source, matching different platforms to different needs across their decision journey. I'll hand it over now to Olivia for the next section here.
Thank you so much, Robin and Megan. Really appreciate it. Now we're going to be moving into the Canada provincial deep dive. This is my favorite section because it really talks about what students are thinking about Canada, but also what are they saying about moving to provinces. So last survey that we had in Emerging Futures 8 was the first time that we actually did this research. So basically what we did is that when we engage in Emerging Futures and we have the set of all the students, those students who have chose Canada, we actually further the questions and we investigate a little bit more about how they feel about provinces. So next slide, please. We're going to be moving right into it. And when we ask students, what type of institution did you apply with when you go to Canada? If you were attending or if you're planning to attend to go in Canada, which institution? So 40% of our students said that they will attend a globally ranked university within Canada. Then 31% said, I will apply to a polytechnic or a college. And 14% of the students said, well, actually, any university, whatever university is fine for me, not globally ranked necessarily. And then 6% were not sure, and then vocational and trade 5%. So you can see here how students who are actually directing their interest to Canada are thinking about, institutions and where to apply. The next section is really about what province. After that, we ask the students in which Canadian province are you planning to study, or are you studying or want to study? And directly to British Columbia is 14%. So the one who continues to dominate is Ontario. And Ontario continues to dominate, in survey to survey and also in our demand. And we can talk about some strategies that you all collectively with your Study BC can do in order to raise that awareness of British Columbia. 7% is Alberta, and then we have, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, they are neck on neck. But I think there is an opportunity for BC to perhaps take away some of the numbers and some of the percentages from Ontario. I have to say that you guys are actually higher than Alberta in our last iteration of these emerging futures. Alberta and BC were closer. So you are, as a province, you're moving a bit forward from Alberta, who's your direct competitor. Next. So when we ask students, what really are the 3 top reasons why you will be selecting a province? I think this is very important, and I have been thinking a lot about it, because if you were in our presentation back in November, you will remember that number 1 before was family and friends leaving the location, which immediately made me realize, okay, Ontario has massive population, and that is why perhaps the students are so drawn to be there with their family and friends and so on. But now it's number 5, and high quality of education becomes number 1. Then the safe environment for the students used to be number 4. So now it's very important that students feel safe and welcome. And that is why maybe, just my assumption, maybe that's why Alberta went down so many points. Because there has been a lot of talks about the immigration referendum and so on. So good opportunity for BC, for all of you to step up into that game and separate more your volume and your demand with new messaging. Number 3 is good employment opportunities. And number 4 is just finding the right institution for you, for the students. So I think that this is very important when you are thinking cohesively as a province to promote yourself, to do some destination campaigns. Maybe this is some of the trends that you can actually be telling students about your quality of education, about how safe BC is, about all the employment opportunities, and just focusing on that. The next slide is one of the slides that I like the most. And let me explain a little bit about the background of this slide. When we were going to launch Emerging Futures 9, when we were thinking about the questions, we send a question, or we ask for questions to all the organizations and governments from across Canada. And this question actually came from your colleagues at BCCIE, and it was really about transfer pathway and how important it could be for students. You know, in BC, to my knowledge, I have worked with several provinces across Canada, and my understanding is that BC has a very good transfer system. And, you know, maybe has issues, but it's better than across Canada of other provinces that I have worked in and at. So the system of BC, it is really, in my opinion, a good option for promotion. Not only that, we put this question to the students and said, in Canada, transfer pathway allows you to start at one institution, such as a college, and later transfer your credits to a university. How important it is to have a pathway when selecting a province to study in. 38.5% of the respondents says that it was very important, which I think is a game changer for ecosystems like the BC system, in which you can promote this, because not every system across Canada, not every system in each province works the way that BC system works. Yes, I know that in other provinces you can transfer from one school to the next, but the decision of transferring the credits is very faculty-based decision. Is not really a systematic decision. So I leave it to you to think about it. I do believe this presents a good opportunity for BC. All the information that we have here for provincial, I think that you could all, you know, through BCCIE, through the government, you can unite and use Study BC really as a platform to promote your province. And to gain some momentum and continue to gain the demand that I think BC can have. Everybody knows that BC is beautiful, but I think that highlighting the quality and the services that you offer to students in ways that are innovative, probably that will help, and it will improve really the positioning of British Columbia. With that, I will pass it to Robin again to speak to you about more BC information.
Thanks, Livia. So this next section takes a look at IDP data, our proprietary IQ demand tool, which aggregates international student search behavior across 40 connected sites. This data reflects real-time demand trends over the past 12 months, and any core partners that are tuning in, you do have access to this data tool. Just to kind of give you a little bit more background, our websites collect or receive 100 million visits annually, offering again a robust and representative view of what prospective students are actively searching for. This dashboard allows us to track and compare demand trends, not only for the top study destinations, but to really observe trends that respond to global policy shifts, geopolitical events in real time. So we will take a look at both the national and provincial level trends. So this graph here shows overall international student demand for Canada, province by province over the past year. Now you can see clearly in red, Ontario leads, accounting for 53% of total international student search. This mirrors the results that we presented a few slides ago. Now, while this highlights Ontario's strong pull, it also signals a need for greater diversification to reduce pressure on just one province, and again, create a more balanced growth across the country. You'll see here that BC and Alberta follow second and third place with 18 and around 11% respectively. Now, while these numbers are much lower than Ontario, they're still significant. And interestingly, this trend suggests that these two provinces for the past few years now are competing for similar student interest. Now, you'll see sort of minimal growth with the remaining provinces here. But what's clear is that provinces are increasingly competing to attract student international students, and there's room for growth. And this contrast in demand presents a real opportunity, specifically for provincial governments, to play a key role in supporting their education sector, either through investing in destination campaigns, again, or student-focused initiatives. Next slide, please. So what you're seeing in this next slide here is a comparison between Canada's percentage share and BC's percentage share of the top source countries for international students. And again, we see some interesting patterns. You'll see that United States is both Canada and BC's top source market. The countries in both lists are same, but with minor ranking shifts. This consistency suggests shared global travel trends influencing both national and provincial levels. India now ranks second for British Columbia and third nationally. And we're also seeing some ranking differences between Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and Nigeria. Now, in the next slide here, we highlight BC's unique academic priorities and how they compare to the national trends. And so the top 3 subject areas are consistent across Canada and BC. So in other words, health and medicine, business and administrative studies, and applied and purist sciences, they remain the core drivers for both national and provincial education demand. BC shows a higher interest in social sciences. Now that possibly could be linked to cultural diversity in media sectors in BC. And BC's tourism economy drives higher interest in hospitality related studies. Now, some of the key insights that come out of this data are, BC is known for its startups and tech innovation and IT industries, highlighting success stories and offering clear employment pathways in these areas will attract ambitious students. Hospitality programs can be tied to, the province's tourism sector through partnerships and resorts and travel companies for internships and co-op placements. And then again, expanding scholarships and research in health and STEM while promoting BC's biotech and healthcare innovation ecosystem will attract the top talent. Now, this next slide here takes a look at the study level demand and how BC compares again to the national picture. So undergraduate studies dominate in BC and postgraduate studies hold more share at the national level. Vocational study demand remains low in both regions, again, both sitting below 10%. Now, while this is consistent, it's also an area that can be highlighted and maybe beneficial for more visibility or targeted promotion, especially given the growing interest in career-driven, career-ready education. So what's the opportunity here? BC can explore strategies to elevate awareness and interest in vocational pathways and postgraduate programs. Again, targeted promotion in these areas can help diversify demand and better align with evolving student preferences. I will actually now pass it over to Olivia for some final remarks.
Thank you, Robin. And just to wrap everything and just to close the session and open up for questions, we have six key takeaways and recommendations. Number one, we all know students are prioritizing now visa certainty before actually they are moving into the application stage. That is something that obviously all of us as a sector, we don't have control over. This is more of IRCC and really what they do with the process and the procedures of the visas. The number one is the return on investment of education is definitely moved by outcomes, not by price. So I think that when you're talking about your programs, highlight really the outcomes and the quality and highlight your graduates and the people who obtain jobs and who are making it after they graduate from your program. I have to say, my son goes to a school in British Columbia right now. And when we were deciding which school to send him, Toronto was one option, a school in Toronto and a school in Vancouver. And because of what the graduates are doing in that school, we decided to send him to Vancouver. So I am a true believer of that ROI, and I think that I made that choice. I live in Saskatchewan, but I made the choice to send my son to British Columbia because you know what the school was proposing to us, that it was really the return on investment of that program. And I don't think I'm an isolated case. This is what the students and parents are telling us and are telling our counselors. The growth potential that BC has, and I know that there is lots of students that come to BC from the US, but I think there is more potential to expand in the US. I think to do some destination campaigns in the US as a province to promote British Columbia. I think that you have more India and Vietnam. I think now are source top markets for BC. So I think that, investigating more on that and picking and choosing, which programs and, and what the states, for example, in the US, you can position BC, I think it will be super important. When it comes to BC strengths, Robin mentioned, your tech and innovation, your startup system, your tourism. I will say also all your movie industry, all of that I think is super important to put it out there. You have a gem of schools, you have a group of schools that are a gem in BC, from universities to colleges, interior BC, and in the coastal area. So I think that everybody as an ecosystem could be promoting, and then join promotions through Study BC. I think this is an imperative thing because there are so much confusion, guys, out there. I think there are so many players in Canada. We have Global Affairs, we have CBIE, we have IRCC, we have, organizations, associations. We have so many bodies that are representing different pockets of the of ecosystems of schools, and then all are singing a different song that students and parents often get confused about what is the Canada message. I think you need to have a BC message, and your BC message needs to be anchored really in what BC offers as a province and as a organic system of schools that you have, that really promotes not only the beauty of BC, the competitive advantage and the return on investment of BC. So I'm hoping that you can use that. And number 6, promoting BC as an ecosystem. We talked about it with your transfer credit. I think that there is a comment here that says, in your research, what factors have impacted the Japanese and Korean markets beyond the deflation of other currencies? Do we have information on that, Robin, from our network?
We certainly can follow up with you and get that information.
Marjorie, if you're okay, we can do that.
Yeah.
And then it says, hi, such a great data as always. Does BC government, federal government, IR Yes, they do. They do. I meet regularly with the government of British Columbia, with our colleagues there. Also, this data is shared with IRCC, and we are going to be also sending it to Global Affairs Canada. And I hope that this data is useful for people, not only creating policy, but most importantly, operationalizing policy, because I think that right now in Canada, that's what we need, more transparency operationally and in how IRCC is managing the study permit processes, and also evaluating the study permits and the approvals and rejections, and having more clear information on that, not only for the students, for the institutions themselves as well. And with that, I am going to close the presentation. I don't know if there is any questions, more questions or comments, and I will pass it to Nelly.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Livia, Megan, Robin, for sharing your insights and all that data. Very insightful as always. Thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. And we would appreciate it as well if you can fill out the survey when you log out of Zoom. Also, a reminder that in a few weeks' time, we have our annual BC International Education Week coming up in Kelowna. And our regular registration ends this Wednesday. So if you want to get the good rate, Please register before Wednesday. And thank you again for joining, everyone, and wish you a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.